Savunts.
Hello there.
And on the website today, on the website keyboard, on the keyboards, it's Marie-Claude Simard.
Hi.
And in the control room, we have Réjean Leblanc. Big, hey, the crowd goes crazy. And we have a special guest today who's going to talk about the Chinese New Year. Jean.
Yeah, you're right, Mark. Thank you for your invitation.
Okay, that's coming up. Levon, what do you have today for us?
Well, I'll speak with Canada's Minister of International Development about the latest scandal over sexual misconduct that's been rocking Oxfam UK.
And Lynn?
Ooh, I'll tell you about former employees of a giant retailer who are going to court to try to recover money for their pension.
And I'll have a story about a very troubling and very divisive legal case in Canada. That's coming up on The Link Online. But to start us off, we're going to talk about the Chinese New Year. Could we have some theme music?
新年快乐!
Oh, yeah. I heard this song this morning. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Some theme music, to get us in the mood. And Zhangang Wang is our guest here today from the Chinese language section here at Radio Canada International. John, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, Chinese New Year's in Canada, this is the year of the...
Dog.
What is that? Is that good, bad? How does that figure?
The dog, it's always represented loyalty and friendly. So the dog is number 11 animal in Chinese zodiac, and it's good year.
What year is it, by the way?
This year is dog year, and unlike Western astrology, each sign lasts for a whole year, and each year take the name of the animal whose characteristics, color, and influence everything that happened for the next 12 months.
Now, of course, this is a special occasion for members of the Chinese community and, of course, throughout China. Yeah. What are some of the foods that one might have to celebrate this occasion?
Wow, talk about the food. Last night, my wife didn't work yesterday. She make a big dish on tables, at least 8 or 10 of them. Yeah. Even my cousin from Vancouver sent me the picture. Use the video, more than 22 dishes on the table.
Oh, my goodness.
Wow, it's, they have a lot of time and they have cooking skills. So because my cousin working in a Fairmont Hotel as a chef.
Okay, wow.
That's prestigious.
So when are you going to introduce us? Like, I want to meet your cousin.
Okay, next time when he come to visit Montreal, I'll tell you.
Had we known, we would have said, bring in some of the food. What are some of the most common things that
in a large country like China, the different area they have different favorite food, but the most common the food during Chinese New Year there are 4 of them. I pick up 4 of them. The first of all, for the Chinese New Year, the very popular food is fish.
Okay,
for sure, because the fish in China in the pronunciation like surplus. Mm-hmm. So when Chinese people always like to have a surplus at the end of the year, that means they save some money, not spend all, like many of Canadians.
The Chinese word for fish is it means the similar word to surplus.
The sound, the pronunciation, 鱼, yeah. When you have a surplus, so not only the food, but the food you cook and how you to eat it is some information, some implication inside. So for the fish, like my wife, she cooked the fish yesterday carefully. Never broken the fish. Must be whole fish, and so things starting to cook until they put in the plate. No broken at all. So, and you cannot eat old fish because it means no leftover, so no surplus at all. So you can leave a little bit left over for the fish for the next day, for today to eat. That means the whole year you have a surplus.
Oh, good. Wow. Excellent.
Very
interesting tradition.
This is a fish, and most popular is a dumpling. You know that.
Oh, yes.
That, that I don't think the most favorite taste for the food, but the atmosphere when you make the dumpling together, the whole family. Somebody chop the meat, somebody chop the vegetables, some make the dough. And when you get together to make it short, there are some meanings for the dumpling because in the ancient China, the silver money like the boat. You know, and also the dumpling also like the shape like the silver the boat.
That's so interesting.
So there a lot of you eat a lot of money at that time. And another kind, most popular food, we call the niangao. It's
niangao.
Yeah, the niangao is sticky the rice cake.
Okay. Sticky rice cake.
Sweet. They put some fruit, put some with together. Niangao means in China to go higher. So higher include many means. Your position go higher. Your
my salary goes higher.
Your salary go higher, something like
your
that.
Your status goes higher.
Yeah. So when you see Chinese people, the most popular is 恭喜发财. 恭喜发财, you make more prosperous for the new year. And Gao means your salary go higher.
Okay.
Could you speak to our boss about that?
And in South China, they have another kind of rice products. It's not cake, but balls. Sweet rice balls. It's where some maybe the red bean inside or some sugar or candy inside.
These are smaller, aren't they?
Smaller one, yeah. You're boiling it. So it's very popular food during Chinese. But for the rice ball, they not only eat during the Chinese New Year, maybe they eat the 2 weeks after.
So if we want to go for dim sum on Sunday, which is a very popular thing that we like to do.
I know, I like Chinese food.
We'll probably be able to get some rice balls at dim sum.
Let me check which Chinese restaurants in Chinatown have that kind. They usually don't have this.
No, I've seen it. I've had it.
Yeah, there's one more tradition, though. It's the red envelopes or the envelopes.
The red envelope is very interesting. And, before the red envelope also only the adult gave it to the unmarried child.
Okay.
Maybe the grandfather or great-grandfather, mother gave it to the child for make them happy. And now some smart parents or the grandparents use the WeChat to send the red envelope digitally.
The smartphone.
So send the digitally to the kids about the envelope, make them happy. And now, since the red envelope, the WeChat very popular, not only the adult give money to the children, between the friend, you have a friend group in WeChat, and you put some money and everybody can catch the money. Just make fun, not real money things, but for make people happy.
Well, John, thank you very much for this. We should, Réjean, should we have some little theme music here, some ambient music for the Chinese New Year, perhaps?
I'm even going to put...
There we go.
Very
John,
cool.
thank you so much for coming in.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
All right, lots more coming up on the program. We're going to hear just a little bit of some authentic ambient music here. We're going to move on now and on a much more story, and this is in the western province of Saskatchewan, and farmers there have been saying for the past few years that theft of farm equipment and even threats against them have risen in the past few years, and police are far too slow to respond. In 2016, a group of Indigenous men and women came onto a farm, and without going into details, which can be found on the internet, one of the Indigenous men was shot and killed. And the farmer, Gerald Stanley, says it was an accident, but he was charged with second-degree murder. Now, this month, the case went to trial, and the jury, after hearing the evidence and a long debate, acquitted him, which has raised the ire of Indigenous groups across the land who say that justice was not done and that there should have been Indigenous people on the jury. It also highlighted a feature of common law called preemptory challenge, where the defense lawyers and the Crown lawyers can each dismiss a set number of jurors without having to say why. Jurors can also be dismissed under challenge for cause, in which the jurors are questioned about their impartiality. Now, as mentioned, there have been dozens of protests, and even the Prime Minister and Justice Minister got involved, saying we must do better, seemingly calling the justice system into question. Now, I spoke to Michael Lacey, an experienced criminal lawyer and president of the Criminal Lawyers Association of Ontario, and in this excerpt, him if he felt there was anything inappropriate or wrong with the jury selection and the trial.
No, absolutely not. There's no indication that the use of the peremptory challenges here were based on inappropriate or racist considerations. I know that that's the narrative that many people are trying to tell, but there's nothing that I'm aware of to suggest that. And certainly in the result here, my view is that 12 people chosen from the community decided the case. They heard the evidence. They had the appropriate legal instructions. Now, I haven't read the entire charge to the jury, but assuming there were no legal errors in the way in which they were told to consider the case, then the verdict here is one that is a just verdict. It's one that's a product of the jurors considering the evidence and applying the law. And that's all we expect from juries across this country every day when they're adjudicating cases.
What did you think when the Prime Minister and the Minister of Justice came out and said things to the nature of, we must do better? What does that mean to you?
Well, they're somewhat equivocal in terms of whether they were commenting on the verdict or not. And I've made it very clear publicly that to the extent that they were commenting on the correctness of the verdict or whether it was a just verdict in this case, it's shameful of them to have done so, and it's clearly inappropriate. They are the leaders of government. There's separation of the judiciary, independence of the judicial branch of government in this country for a reason, and they should not be commenting on the correctness of a verdict in any way. The problem is when they were saying those things, the perception is that only a guilty verdict of some sort would have been a just result in this case. But one of the things that just troubles me and our organization is that historically the use of peremptory challenges has been criticized where the Crown have used them to get rid of potential persons of color on the jury. And what's troubling is I didn't see the Attorney General or the Prime Minister raise concerns about the peremptory challenge process until this case.
What is your overall assessment of what's happening now in regard to this, what seems to be a very divisive case now in the entire country?
It is a very divisive case, and my overall concern, look, no one can deny that the Indigenous peoples of our country have been mistreated historically, that there's systemic racism that has plagued the manner in which we've interacted with our Indigenous people, and we need to do better in terms of eliminating systemic racism. All of those are important and laudable goals, but where I'm troubled is that the narrative that seems to be gaining some traction in the public is that somehow any verdict short of a guilty one would necessarily be wrong and not just. And I'm troubled by that because it undermines our judicial system, it undermines the jury system, and it undermines what appears to have otherwise been a very fair trial in this case.
And that was an excerpt of my conversation with Michael Lacey, president of the Criminal Lawyers Association of Ontario, and the full interview is in the highlights section. And the fallout from this trial over as protests continue, and government officials say they're looking into possible changes in the justice system, and there's no word yet of an appeal. Coming up, a big retail chain, Sears, is being sued. Réjean?
C'est sur cette date que les sénateurs se sont...
Oops. That's the fun of live radio and TV. Well, anyway, it's a serious subject, actually, we're dealing with here, because the big retail chain Sears, which was an iconic retail chain in Canada for decades. Well, it's back in the news this week. The company has declared bankruptcy, and some 6,000 employees are worried they will get less money in pension benefits than they're supposed to. And Lynn, what's the story here?
Well, Mark, you and I have both posted news about this story. The pension fund is short almost $270 $70 million, and there's a further estimated $400 million in unpaid health and life insurance benefits. Now, the pensioners want to recover some of the $2.9 billion in dividend payments that were made to shareholders between 2005 and 2013, and some of that money, came from the sale of Sears Canada assets that included prime real estate. Now, they say that the dividends were paid at the same time as sales and profits were dropping, and the pension plan was being underfunded. So, to get a better explanation, I called Christo Ivalis. He is a postdoctoral fellow, and he specializes in labor and political history at the University of Toronto.
Essentially what happened is when Sears was operating their business still, they had a pension shortfall, which means that there was less money in their pension fund than was needed to take care of the workers in it. And when the company went bankrupt, like with a lot of its liabilities to other businesses, to its creditors, what have you, it also had a kind of liability to its pensioners. And what ended up happening is that during the bankruptcy proceedings, a lot of that money for pensioners was lost. Now, the pensioners are going to court. Some of them are with their lawyers because they've argued that, the company in the mid-2000s until fairly recently was paying out dividends to its investors, in the billions of dollars range. And it was felt that that money would have been more responsibly used to help take care of the company's liabilities. So that's what they're trying to argue in court.
Now, when a company goes bankrupt, is there no obligation to the pensioners?
It really depends. In a sense, they are eligible to get some money, but pensioners are not put first in line when it comes to this sort of thing. Usually investors are of various kinds. So in cases like this, the company goes bankrupt, but there are people in line in front of pensioners, investors of various kinds again. And in other cases, like with Stelco, a steel company in Hamilton, Ontario, they didn't go bankrupt in the sense that they closed, but they did enter a restructuring and were able into that restructuring to kind of sidestep partially their obligations to retirees and workers on things like benefits and pensions. And that's, something that we've been seeing happen in recent years in Canada.
So is there any move afoot to try to protect pensioners in the future?
To a certain degree, that's what one of the things the trial is trying to do. It's trying to win extra money to be included in this case under the hope that it'll give more of that pensionable money back to the workers. But I think, politically there has been a move in a sense to make this a political issue. The New Democratic Party, Canada's kind of social democratic party of the left, has been proposing legislation that in bankruptcies, in restructurings, that pensions and benefits of workers and retirees would be considered a kind of key source that needs to be funded, whereas right now it's not. So Scott Duvall, he's a member of Parliament from Hamilton, Ontario, and he's spoken about the need to put legislation through that'll protect workers and their benefits more than they are now. It won't mean that it'll be 100% necessarily, but it will mean that workers are among the first considerations when companies go bankrupt.
So historian Christo Ivalis of the University of Toronto says that before it was voted into office, the Liberal Party promised pension reform, but he's not sure that now that they're in government that they're going to follow through. He says the party tends to run for office more progressively than they act once they are governing. Also, he says, and I'll quote him, the government is more of the mindset that protecting investors is more important than protecting workers, because not protecting investors kind of undermines economic confidence. So it's not clear how the case is going to turn out. But Ivalis says that it does bring the issue back into the public eye, and he suggests that people who feel very strongly about this issue, he's saying it's a good time to contact your member of parliament or your prime minister and say something, complain about it. And people should know that we can write to our members of Parliament for free. You don't have to put a stamp on it. It will get delivered.
Delivered, yes, indeed.
Delivered. And, of course, there's email. So that's his advice. And also, by the by, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, this is an NGO, non-governmental organization, they did a study and found that there are many large Canadian corporations now which are underfunding their pension plans. So
it's not to be concerned about.
All
right, coming up in just a moment, letters. All right, it's time now for some of the comments you posted, and a reminder that you can post your thoughts and read comments of others to each story by going to the very bottom of that story page to submit your comment. And starting us off today, well, we have several comments to a story about a Canadian college offering a course in homeopathy and doctors' strong reaction. And although this was a story last week, we received more comments on this week. And first we have a comment from Stephen Malthouse, who wrote in part,
as a physician, it's clear to me that there are many conditions in everyday medical practice that are not amenable to conventional treatments, such as most pain syndromes. We need a critical, unbiased approach to new therapies, such as homeopathy, if we want to get out of this mess. This type of prejudiced journalism only prolongs the suffering of patients while maintaining the status quo of a mediocre medical system.
All right, on the same subject, Sandra commented in part.
A research study entitled Clinical Characteristics and Treatment of Polyneuropathy Developed After Chemotherapy addressed the advantage of homeopathy for cancer patients. Patients who had to stop therapy because of severe and painful adverse effects were able to resume treatment after homeopathic treatment.
All right, and again on the concerns expressed by a medical doctor over a college in Canada offering a 3-year course in homeopathy, Alvin Schmuckler wrote this way.
Such righteous indignation from someone who supports conventional drugs, which are the third leading causes of death in the U.S. and a major cause of death in other industrialized nations. Despite the negative propaganda, 100 million people in India depend on homeopathy entirely for dengue fever, malaria, and other serious diseases. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of board-certified homeopathic medical doctors practice in England, France, Germany, Canada, India, Pakistan, Brazil, and Argentina. And I would just like to put my 2 cents in there, and that is science. If people really, before they make decisions about this, should look at the body of science and what it tells you about the effectiveness. Science-based decisions are good.
All right, before we move on, I should mention that college in Ontario actually, in light of all this criticism, has decided to cancel the homeopathy program they were going to offer. Now, in a story called Canada's Arms Trade Dilemma, and Levin, if you just very briefly, because we're running out of time, just explain what this arms trade dilemma is.
Basically, it comes to this. Canada has a little known but a very thriving arms industry. So we produce arms for our NATO allies, chiefly for the United States. We also export all kinds of arms. And one of the most controversial deals recently was this deal to supply Saudi Arabia with thousands of Canadian-made light armored vehicles, very advanced military kind of vehicles that Saudi Arabia, with its record on human rights, its record in Yemen, has raised a lot of issues. And we should say it's a $15 billion deal that will support thousands of jobs in Ontario, where these vehicles are being made. So that's the dilemma.
Well, the dilemma is the government wants to now sort of get involved in this and say, wait a minute, we can't...
Well, that's the thing. The government wants to have its cake and eat it too. So the government wants to have the arms industry, which is a high-tech industry in most cases. It's a good, well-paying jobs. But it also wants to create conditions where these arms are sold to countries with questionable
or not questionable
or non-questionable human rights, and nobody asks questions about them.
All right, so Aaron Sanders made this comment on the story.
Yes, force a company to do something that may risk the safety of its employees by making them divulge sensitive information. That should go over like a lead balloon when the company that generates thousands of jobs and millions of dollars decides to pull up stakes and move overseas or to America, where it would likely benefit from better tax options, offer more comprehensive employee package programs and pay, and not have to put up with your bureaucratic nonsense of the government doing what it does best, sticking its nose in places it doesn't belong.
All right, and on that note, we'll end our letters for this edition, and coming up, we're going to be looking at a scandal in a humanitarian rights, humanitarian aid group.
Yeah.
This is an ugly scandal over sexual misconduct by some key members of Oxfam UK, and it is, in fact, shaking up the humanitarian NGO community. And Lavon, you looked into this a little bit more?
That's right, Mark. It's a scandal that blew up last week in Britain over when local media reported that high-ranking Oxfam UK officials, including the organization's country director in Chad and then later in Haiti, was involved in sexual misconduct. Media reports talked about humanitarian workers hiring prostitutes while working to help thousands of Haitians following an earthquake in 2010, which killed more than 200,000 people and left more than 1 million people homeless. The scandal has caused Oxfam to lose several donors and high-profile volunteers. There are several voices now calling on the British government to cut its funding to Oxfam. Oxfam Quebec, which is a separate organization but has the same belongs to the same confederation, also had an office in Haiti at the same time and has faced questions about what it knew about the behavior of its British counterparts. For more on how the scandal could affect Oxfam Quebec and Oxfam Canada, which are completely separate organizations, I spoke with Marie-Claude Bibeau. She is Canada's Minister of International Development.
Obviously, we'd never want to hear that such event took place. Our humanitarian workers are doing a very good job, and when one of them behave inappropriately, it's a shame for all of us, and this is why we condemn all forms of exploitation and abuse in a very strong manner.
Now, if I understand correctly, you had a phone conversation with representatives of both Oxfam Quebec and Oxfam Canada. Can you tell me what you told them?
Well, I wanted to hear from them first, and they confirmed to me that no employee or Canadian funds are connected to this unacceptable situation that happened in Haiti. They also told me the processes that they have in place to prevent and tackle, if necessary, when such type of behavior. And I was reassured that they do have very strict processes to make sure that to prevent as much as possible. And if there's inappropriate conduct, they have a procedure to tackle the situation very rapidly.
Does this mean that whatever funding that they're getting from the federal government will continue?
Yes, I have no concern about the organization in general. We are talking about cases that, we're talking about a case that happened with Oxfam UK, and the Canadians were not linked in any ways to this situation. No, our organization still have all my respect and confidence. I have the confidence in them. They showed me that they have the good processes in place. And anyway, we will take this opportunity to have a larger conversation with all our humanitarian partners. Actually, tomorrow I will have a first one with our main humanitarian partners. I want to hear from them. What are their procedures? I want to build on the best practices and clarify my expectations and clarify our contractual relation with our humanitarian partners. I also had a conversation with my UK counterpart. We will work together to make sure that we pursue this, we follow up on this reality that we all have to live with.
That was an excerpt of my conversation with Canada's Minister of International Development, Marie-Claude Bibeau.
And we've done it again. We've managed to use up another half hour of time, and I hope you enjoyed the show. For Linda and Lavon Savants,
bye.
Marie-Claude Simard, and in the control room, Régent Leblanc, I'm Mark Montgomery. Do take care until next week. Bye-bye. Which camera? Which camera? You never know. We got to have lights up.